Chapter 8. Something stepped on a little stick. As soon as the twig cracked, my eyes snapped open and I was wide awake. I held my breath and kept as still as I could. Whatever it was sneaking up on me, and I knew I'd woke up because it stopped moving and it kept as still as it could, too. And even though my head was still under my blanket, I could feel two eyes staring at me real hard. And I knew these weren't critter eyes. These were eyes made the hair on the back of your neck rise up the way only human beings' eyes can do. Without wiggling or jiggling around too much under my blanket, I got my fingers wrapped around my jackknife. Right when I was ready to push the covers off of me and start running or stabbing, whoever it was that had been watching jumped right on top of me. I was trapped as a roach under a dish rag. I tried to guess the exact spot that the person's heart was at. Then I pulled my knife back and a voice said, "If you ain't a kid called Bud from the home, I'm really sorry about jumping on you like this." It was Bugs. I tried to talk. It felt like had to suck all the air out of Flint. I finally got breathing right and said, "Doggone it, Bugs, it's me." "You nearly scared me to death." He got off of me and I threw the blanket over the side. "You don't know how lucky you are. I was about fixing to stab you in the heart." Bug looked like he knew he had just had a real close call. He said, "I'm sorry, Bud. I didn't mean to scare you, but everybody knows how you like to sleep with your knife open, so I figured I'd best grab a hold of you so you wouldn't wake up slicing nobody." Shucks. Even though it was Bugs who came real close to putting his heart poked, I was the one who was still having trouble catching my breath. I asked, "How come you are back at the home?" But before I had a chance to answer, he said, "You're on the lam." Bug said, "Yup, I'm going back to riding the rails. When I heard about you beating up that kid so bad that you had to take off, I figured it was time for me to get going too. I thought you might be hanging around the library, so I come down to see if you wanted to go with me. Where you heading?" "There's always fruit to be picked out west. I heard you can make enough money to get by out there. There's supposed to be a train leaving sometime tomorrow. Did you really beat that kid up at the foster home?" I said, "Uh huh. We kind of had a fight." "How long is it to get out west?" Bug said, "Well, it depends on how many trains you got to hop." "Was it really 2 years older than you?" Uh huh. He was 12. "Is it fun to hop a train?" "Some of the time it is. Some of the time it's scary." "We heard he was kind of big too, was he?" I said, "Yeah, he was pretty big. I can't see how we can hop a train, though. They look like they're moving pretty doggone fast." Bug said, "Most of the times you don't hop on when they're going fast. Most of the times you try to climb on them when it's sitting in the train yard." "Hey, did that guy cry after you whooped him?" "Well, kind of. He looked real scared, then told his mamma to keep me away from him. They even said I was a hoodlum." "Will we be sleeping on the train and everything?" "Sure will. Some of the time. The train don't stop for 2 or 3 days. Man, I always try to tell people that just because someone's skinny don't mean they can't fight. You're a hero now, Bud." "Nah, didn't really do nothing much." "Well, how about the toilet? How are we going to use the toilet if the train doesn't stop?" Bug said, "Well, you just kind of lean out the door and go." "When the train is still moving?" "Yeah, you get a real nice breeze." "Aw, man, that sounds great. Count me in. I can't wait." Bug spit a big glob of slob in his hand and said, "I knew I could depend on you, Bud." And I spit a big glob in my hand and said, "We're brothers forever, Bugs." We slapped our hands together as hard as we could, and we got our slobs mixed up real good, and we waved them in the air so they dry. Now it was official. I finally had a brother. Bug said, "Well, we'll go down to the mission. There's bound to be someone who knows about where we can hop a train, and then we'll be on the lam together." We found out we'd have to go to a city called Hooperville, just outside of Flint. The only trouble was, nobody knew exactly where Hooperville was. It was dark before we found the right direction. I'd never heard of a city that was so doggone hard to find. So we walked on the trail through some woods and now right up against Red Creek. We could tell we were getting close to Hooperville because we heard somebody playing the mouth organ and the smell of food cooking was getting stronger. We kept walking in the direction that the sky was glowing in orangish light. When we could hear the music real clear and folks talking to each other, the sound of sticks cracking in the fire, we started cutting through the trees. That way we could peek into Hooperville first. We looked out from the behind a big tree and we saw that a big wind or even two or three big wolves huffling and puffling real hard could blow Hooperville into the next county. It was a bunch of huts and shacks thrown together out of piece of boxes and wood and cloth. The Amos's shed would have looked real fancy in the house here. Right near our tree was a big fire that had been lighting up the sky, and it looked like 100 people were sitting around it, watching things burn or waiting for the food cooking in three big pots to set up in the fire. There were 2 liter fires, or two littler fires burning in Hooperville. One had a pot big enough to boil a whole person in it. A man was stirring things in the pot with a big stick, and when he raised the stick up, he'd pull some breeches or shorts out of the pass and pass it over to the white man who was hanging the clothes on the line to dry. There was a mountain of clothes on the ground next to him, waiting for their turn. On the fire of Hooperville was real small. It was off onto the side by itself. There were only 5 white people sitting in this fire, 2 kids, a man, a woman holding a little wrapped baby. The baby sounded like those new sick babies at the home. They were coughing like it was half dead little animal. Bugs whispered, "Shoot. This ain't no city. This just another cardboard jungle." "A what?" "A cardboard jungle. Somewhere you can get off the train, clean up, and get something to eat without cops chasing you around out of town." I said, "Well, that's what we're gonna do. We can't just go busting into this city and expect someone to feed us, can we?" Bug said, "One of us has to got to go talk to him. Let's flip for it." "Okay." Bugs rumbled around his pocket and found a penny. He rubbed it against his breeches and said, "Heads I win, tails you lose." "Okay." He flipped the penny up into the air and I caught it, and he slapped it down on the back of his left hand. He peeked underneath it, right hand, to see a big smile crack his face. "Shucks." Bug said, "Tails, you lose." Dang. So what should I say? Ask him if this is Hooperville and see if you got any extra food. I moved out from behind the tree and walked over to the biggest fire. I waited until some folks noticed me and said, "Excuse me, is this here Hooperville?" The man who was playing the mouth organ stopped and everyone else looked at me. One of the white men said, "What is you looking for?" I said, "A city called Hooperville, sir." They all laughed. The mouth organ man said, "Nah, son. You're looking for Hooversville with a V, like the President Herbert Hoover." I said, "Oh, is this it, sir?" The man said, "This is one of them." I said, "One of them?" He answered, "They're all over the country. This here is our Flint version." "And all of them are called Hooversville?" "That's right. Mr. Hoover worked so hard at making sure the city got one that it seems like it would be criminal not to call him anything else." Someone said, "Well, that's the truth." I said, "Well, how are we going to know if we're in the right one?" The mouth organ man said, "Are you hungry?" "Yes, sir." "Are you tired?" "Yes, sir." "Are you scared about what's going to happen tomorrow?" I didn't want anyone to think I was a baby, so I said, "Not exactly scared, sir. Maybe I'm a little nervous." The man smiled and said, "Well, son, any place where the other folks in need, this is the same thing that you are, is the right place to be. This is exactly the Hooversville you were looking for." I knew that man was trying to say this was the exact kind of circle talking, cross talking that Mama used to do. Bugs hadn't had the kind of practice. He came from behind the tree and said, "I don't get it. You said there were Hooversvilles all over the place. What if we was looking for a Hooversville in Detroit or Chicago? And how can this be the right one? Be the white one?" And the man said, "You boys from Flint?" I said, "Yes, sir." The man waved his mouth organ like a magic wand and pointed over the little cardboard city. "Boys," he said, "look around you. This city was bigger than I thought it was. The raggedy little huts were in every direction you looked. And now there were more people sitting around than I first thought, too. Mostly it was men and big boys, but there were a couple women, every now and then a kid or two. There were all colors you could think of, black, white, brown, but the fire made everyone look like they were different shades of orange. There were dark orange folks sitting next to medium orange folks, sitting next to light orange folks. All these people, the mouth organ man said, are just like you. They're tired, they're hungry, and a little bit nervous about tomorrow. This here is the right place for y'all to be because we're all in the same boat. And you boys are nearer to home than you'll ever get. Someone said, "Amen, brother." The mouth organ man said, "It don't matter if you're looking for Chicago or Detroit or Orlando or Oklahoma City. I rode the rails to all of them. You might think, you might hear that things are better just down the line, but they're singing the same songs all over the country. Believe me, son, being on the road is no good. If you two boys are from Flint, this is right the Hooversville for you." Someone said, "Brother, why don't we feed these boys?" Then one looks at them. He ain't like he ain't got 2 or 3 months. The one looks like he hasn't eaten anything or 2 or 3 months. Shucks. He didn't have to point it out or nothing. Everybody knew what we meant. But I didn't care. The food was bubbling up, and the 3 big pots even sounded delicious. The mouth organ man said, "You're welcome to join us, but we all pitch in here. So unless either of you can carry one of them smoked West Virginia hams, them bags, it looks like you'll be pulling KP tonight." I said, "Well, pulling what, sir?" He said, "KP, kitchen police. You do the cleanup after everyone's had their fill. There's a couple of other young folks who'll show you what to do and what you'll have to do." Me and Bugs both said, "Yes, sir." They seemed like the real good trade. A woman handed me and Bugs a flat, square, empty tin can. "That's me lord's. It's your china. Please be careful not to chip it." My china had the words Jumbo AP Sardines stamped at the bottom of it. She handed us 2 beat-up old spoons and said, "Don't be shy. Just you two just about missed supper. You best hurry up." She took us over to one of the big pots, filled up our tins. "You're lucky," she said. "It's muskrat stew, and there's plenty of leftovers tonight. Eat as much as you can." The stew was made out of dandelion greens and a couple of potatoes and some small wild carrots and some crawdads and a couple little chunks of meat. It tasted great. We both even got seconds. When we were done, the woman told us, "Okay, you boys leave your bags here. It's time to do the dishes now." "Uh-huh. Ma'am, I'd like to keep my suitcase with me wherever I go." "I promise your suitcase will be safe here." I remembered the Amoses had promised the same thing. "You'll watch it yourself, ma'am? You'll make sure no one looks inside it?" She said, "Son, we don't have no thieving in here. We all look out for each other." I said, "Thank you, ma'am." And I put my suitcase down near the woman's feet. Me and Bugs, a little white boy and a little girl, loaded the whole mess of dirty tin cans and spoons and a couple of red plates and forks and big wooden box and lugged them down to Thread Creek. The little girl had been in Hooversville the longest, so she got to tell the rest of us what to do. She said, "I don't suppose neither of you new boys knows how to do dishes the right way, do you?" Me and Bugs had done tons of dishes in the house, so I said, "Sure we do. We used to be really good at cleaning up." Bugs said, "Dang, girl, you act like this is the first cardboard village I've been in. I know you don't know dishes out there or out here." She said, "Okay then, we'll split them up. And you," she pointed to Bugs, the other kid, "can do the half, and me and this boy can do the others. What's your name?" I said, "Bud, not Buddy." She said, "Oh, I'm Daisy Malone." Daisy handed Bug had handed Bugs and the other little boys some rags and some soap and some powder, and they started splashing the dishes in the water. Me and the girl walked a little farther down the creek and started unloading the rest of the dishes. "You'll dry, I'll wash," she said. She handed me the rag just as soon as she'd splashed some of the tins in the water to give me I dry and stick them in the wooden box. She said, "Where are you from?" "Flint, right here." "So you and your friend come down here to get on that train tomorrow?" "Where's it going?" "Chicago," she said. "Is that west from here?" "Uh-huh." "Then, yep, that's where we're heading," I said. "Where are you from?" "Ah, Lancaster, Pennsylvania." "You going to take the train too?" She said, "Uh-huh. My daddy is. Folks say there's work out west, so he's gonna try again." "So you're going to wait here for him?" "Uh-huh." She was really fast at washing dishes, but I noticed she got kind of slow and was touching my hand a lot when it came to giving them to me. She said, "Where's your mama and daddy?" "My mother died 4 years ago." "Ooh, sorry to hear that." "It's okay. She didn't suffer or nothing." "So where's your daddy?" "I think he lives in Grand Rapids. I've never met him." "Oh, sorry to hear that. Shucks." She held on right onto my hand and then said, and I squirmed my hand loose and said, "That's okay too." Deza said, "No, it's not. And you should quit pretending that it is." "Who said I'm pretending anything? I know you are. My daddy says families are the most important thing there is. That's why me and Mama are going to wait together for him to come back, or wait for us to come to him." I said, "Well, my mother said the same thing, that families should be there for each other all the time. She always used to tell me that no matter where I went or what I did, she'd be there for me, even if she wasn't somewhere that I could see her." She told me, shucks. There are some folks who have you running your mouth before you even know what you're doing. I quit talking and acted like I was having a real hard time drying the tin that she just handed me. "What'd she tell you, Bud?" I looked at Daisy Malone and I figured I'd never seen her again in my life, so I kept shooting off my mouth. "She would tell me every night before I went to sleep that no matter what happened, I could sleep knowing that there would have had been never been a little boy anywhere anytime who was loved more than she loved me, and she told me that as long as I remembered that, I'd be okay." "And you knew it was the truth?" "Just as much as I know my name's Bud, not Buddy." She said, "Don't you have any kin and kinfolk in Flint?" "No." "I guess I can't blame you for wanting to ride the rails. My mama says these poor kids on the road all alone are like dust in the wind. But I guess you're different, aren't you, Bud? I guess you sort of carry your family around inside you, huh?" "I guess I do. Inside my suitcase, too." She said, "So, you been staying in an orphanage since your mama died?" "What makes you say that?" "Well, you're kind of skinny, but I can tell by the way you talk and by the way you act you haven't been out on the road for very long, and you still look young." I said, "Shucks, I'm not all that young. I'm going to be 11 in November 14th, and I'm not skinny, I'm wiry. Some folks think I'm a hero." "So, Mr. Hero, we're the same age, but you have been staying in an orphanage." "I've been staying in a home. My daddy says being on the road ain't fit for a dog, much less than a kid. How come you don't just go back to the orphanage?" She started touching my hand too much again. Daisy Malone seemed like she was right. Excuse me. She was all right, so I came clean with her. "Don't tell anyone, but I lit out from a foster home, so I'm on the lam. And I wouldn't go back to that home even if I could. It's getting so there's too many kids in there. So that's better than being cold and hungry all the time and dodging railroad police." "What do you mean? You don't think we just let people jump on the trains, do you?" "Well, I guess I hadn't thought about that. See, I knew you were too nice to have been out on the road. You're going to have a bad surprise tomorrow morning." "Oh, that won't bother me too much." She said, "Oh, yeah, I forgot. You're a hero or some folks." When Deeza smiled, the little dimples jumped up in their little brown cheek. I didn't answer. I just kept drying tins. She got the last of the four of the five tins plates, and Deeza said, "You ever kiss a girl at the orphanage?" Uh, no. Are you kidding?" "No. Why? Are you afraid of girls?" "You must be kidding." She said, "Okay," and closed her eyes and smushed her lips up and leaned close to me. "Dang!" If I didn't kiss her, she'd think I was scared of girls. If I did kiss her, she might blab or Bugs might send me to strangers and tell what happened. I looked down at the creek to where Bugs and the other boys were, still splashing the water. It was dark enough that I couldn't what they were see them to us too good. I scooched my lips up and I smashed my face on Daisy Malone's, and we stuck like that for a hot second, but it felt like a long time. When I opened my eyes, I pulled back, and Deezer kept her eyes closed and smiled. She looked down and stuck her hand in my hand. This time, I let her keep it there. She looked at me, at the crick in the woods, and on the other side, and said, "Isn't this romantic?" I looked out to see if she was what she was talking about. The only thing I could see was the moon, like a big egg yolk, way up in the sky. You could hear the water and the sound of the mouth organ man playing a sad song back at Hooverville. I sneaked up past the peak and I sneaked another peek at Deeza's dimples. She said, "You hear that? That's Shenandoah. He's playing. Isn't it pretty?" "I guess so. Do you know the words?" "Uh-huh. Listen. It's been 7 long years since the last seen her. Way, hey, you rolling river. Been 7 long years since the last time I've seen her. Way, hey, I bound away, cross the Missouri." Yep, that's a sad song. I didn't think it was pretty at all. She squeezed my hand and said, "Isn't it? It's about an Indian man and a woman who can't see each other for 7 years, but in all that time they still stay in love, no matter what happens. It reminds me of my mother and my father." "Your dad's been gone for 7 years before?" She looked out over the creek, and their eyes at the big eggy moon had her hypnotized. I pulled my hand from hers and said, "Well, that's just about it for dishes." She smiled again. "Bud, I'll never forget this night." I didn't tell her, but I probably wouldn't forget it either. I'd practiced on the back of my hand before, but this was the first time I've ever busted a slob with a real live girl. We loaded on the dishes in the box and walked down to Bugs and the other kid. And then we put their dishes on top of ours and headed back. Bug said, "How come you're looking strange, Bud? You look like you've been chunked in the head with a rock." Daisy Malone laughed for a second. I thought she was going to rat me out. I said, "I don't know. I guess that song made me kind of sad." Bug said, "Yeah, it is kind of sad." Right before we got to the cardboard jungle, we past the white people with the coughing baby at their own little fire. I said to Daisy, "How come they're off alone and they're not allowed to sit around the big fire? 'Cause that baby's making so much noise?" Daisy said, "Uh-huh. They have been invited, but my daddy said you got to feel for them. All they're eating is dandelion green soup. They're broke. Their clothes are falling off them. Their baby's sick, but when someone took them some food and blankets, the man said thank you very much, but we're white people. We ain't in need of a handout." When we got back to the main fire in Hooverville, we put the dishes in another box. Daisy made us turn them all upside down so that if the rain got into them, they would rust. I went to the woman with my suitcase. It was the same spot when I left it, and the knots in the twine were the same kind I tie. I said, "Thank you very much, ma'am." She said, "I told you not to worry." So I sat back in the big fire with Bugs. The mouth organ man said, "I suppose you boys are going out on the train tomorrow." I said, "The one for Chicago, sir?" He said, "That's the one." "Yes, we are, sir." "Well, you best get as much sleep as you can. I suppose you'll be pulling out 5:15, but you never know with these with these freights." We got into one of those shacks with some of those other boys. Bugs was snoring in 2 seconds, but I couldn't sleep. I opened my jackknife and put it under my blanket. I was thinking the Daisy's mama was right. Someone who doesn't know who their family is, like a dust blowing in the windstorm. They don't really belong any one place. So I started wondering if going to California was the right thing to do. I might not know who my family was, but I knew there was someone out there. And it seemed to make a whole lot more sense to think that there were somewhere around Flint instead of out west. So I opened my suitcase to get my blanket. Even though I trusted the woman who guarded it for me, I checked to make sure everything was okay. I picked the tobacco pouch that had my rocks in it, pulled the drawstring open. I shook the 5 smooth stones and looked at them. They'd been in that drawer after the ambulance took Mama away, and I've had them ever since. Someone had took a pen or something and had writ on all 5 of them, but it was written a code so I couldn't understand what they meant. One of them said Kent Island, ill, 5, 10, 11. Another one said Lagouti, 5, 16, 11. And then one was Sturgis, 8, 30, 12. And Gary, Indiana, IN, 6, 13, 12. And the last one said Flint, Michigan, 8, 11, 11. I put them back in the pouch and pulled the string tight. I pulled the envelope that had the picture of the saggy pony at Miss B's Gotten Moon Park. It was fine. Next, I counted the flyers again. All 5 were there. I slid all of them back except for the blue one. I held it up so I could catch some of the light in the big fire. I kept looking at the picture and wondering why this one bothered Mama so much. The more I thought about it, the more I knew this man just had to be my father. Why else would Mama keep these? I used a little trick to help me fall asleep. I pulled my blanket right over my head and breathed in the smell real deep. After doing that 3 times, the smell of the shack and the Hooverville were gone, and only the smell of the blanket was in my nose. And that smell always reminded me of my mama and how she used to read me to sleep every night. So I took 2 more breaths, pretended I was hearing my mama reading to me about the billy goat's gruff, or the fox and the grapes and the dog that saw his own reflection in the water, or some stories she'd checked out of the library. I could hear Mama's voice getting farther and farther away, as I imagined I was in the story, until finally her voice and the story all mixed into one. I learned that it was best to be asleep before Mama finished the story, because if she got done and I was still awake, she'd always tell me the story was about. I never told Mama, but that always ruined it for me. The story. Shucks. Here I was thinking I was just hearing something funny about a fox and a dog, and Mama spoilt it by telling me they were really lessons about not being greedy or wishing for things you couldn't have. I took 2 more breaths and started thinking about that little hen and that baked the bread, and I heard, "Not I," said the pig. "Not I," said the goat. "Not I," said the big bad wolf. And then whoop, zoop, zoop, slop, I was asleep. I started dreaming about the man with the giant fiddle. He was walking away, and I kept calling him, but he wouldn't look back. Then the dream got a lot better. I turned away from Herman E. Calloway and was there and stood with Deza Malone. I told her, "I really like your dimple," and she laughed. "See you in 7 years." The man screamed, "Get up, they're trying to sneak it out early." I jumped straight out and banged my head on the top of the shack. I ran outside. It was still dark. Fire was just piled glowing sticks. The man was screaming at the top of his lungs, "Get up! They fired the engine. They're fixing to take off." Bugs and the other boys came and stood next to me. Bugs said, "Is it a raid?" Someone said, "No, they're trying to sneak out before we get up." People started running over to Hooversville. Bug said, "Come on, Bud. Get your stuff. We got to get on that train." I folded up my blanket, put it in my suitcase, and tied the twine back. I hadn't gotten 6 giant steps away when a boy stuck his head out the door and yelled, "Hey, Slim, is this your paper?" I looked back. My blue flyer. I forgot to put that back in my suitcase. Bug said, "Hurry, I'll wait." "I'll catch you. Go ahead." I ran back and took my flyer from the boy. "Thanks a lot." I ran back out to the crowd and was tearing through the woods. There were a million of men and boys running in the same direction. I didn't want to fold the flyer up, so I was running and slid in between the twine and the suitcase. I put it back once I got on the train. No one was talking, and you could hear the sounds of a million feet smacking the trail and the sounds of a million people trying to catch their breaths. Finally, a hiss sound started getting louder and louder, and I knew we weren't far away. So we broke out of the woods, and there in the dark was a train. A locomotive was hissing and spitting out coal black smoke into the sky. Every once in a while, a big shower of sparks would glow up from the inside of the dark cloud, making it look like gigantic black genie was trying to raise up out of the smokestack. The train went as far back as you could see. There must have been thousands of boxcars, but everyone had stopped and just standing there watching, and no one was trying to get on. So I pushed my way to the front to see if I could find Bugs. I saw why everyone had stopped. There were 4 cop cars, 8 cops, standing between the crowd and the train. The cops had billy clubs and were spread out to protect the train. The crowd kept getting bigger and bigger. One of the cops yelled, "You men, no! You can't get on this train. Just go back. Go back to Shantytown, and there won't be no trouble." A white man said, "This is the only train going west for the next month. You know we got families to feed. We have to get on it. You go get back in your cars, and you'll be all right. There won't be no trouble." The cop said, "I'm warning you. The Flint police are on their way, and this here is private property, and they have orders to shoot anyone who tries to get on that train." A man next to me said, "I'd rather be shot than sit around and watch my kids go hungry." The cop said, "This is America, boys. We're sounding like a bunch of commies. You know, I can't let you get on this train. I got kids to feed too, and I'd lose my job." Someone yelled, "Well, welcome to the club, brother." It seemed like we stood looking at the cops and them looking for a whole hour, our side getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and the cops started looking nervous. The one who was doing all the talking saw them fidgeting and said, "Hold steady, men." One of the cops said, "Jake, there's 400 men out there, and more are coming." "I don't like those odds, Mr. Pinkerton. Ain't paying me enough to do this." So he threw his cop hat and his billy club on the ground. Everybody froze when the train whistle blew one long time, and the engine started saying shh, 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 shh. The big steel wheels creaked a couple of times and then started moving. 4 of the other cops threw their hats and billy clubs down too. The boss cop yelled, "You lily-livered rats!" And it was like someone said, "Oh, on your mark, get set, go!" And then the train started, engines was saying shh, 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 shh. Had a million boys and men broke for the train. I got pushed from behind and I fell on top of my suitcase. Someone reached down and pulled me up. I squeezed my bag to my stomach and ran. The train was going faster and faster and faster. People were jumping on and reaching back to help others. I finally got onto the tracks and was running as hard as I could, but I looked up into the boxcar and saw Bugs. He screamed, "Bud, throw your bag! Throw your bag!" I used both hands, threw my suitcase on the train. Bugs caught it, and then he sat behind me. The blue flyer flew out of the twine and fluttered outside the door. But it was like a miracle. The flyer flipped over 3 times and landed right in my hand. I slowed down and put it in my pockets. Bugs reached his arm out and screamed, "Bud, don't stop, run!" So I started running again, but there it felt like my legs were gone. And the car with Bugs was getting farther and farther and farther away, and finally I stopped. Bugs was leaning out the door. "Stop reaching for me." He waved and disappeared into the boxcar. A second later, my suitcase came flying out the door. I walked over to there, it landed, picked it up. Man, this was one tough suitcase. You couldn't even tell that it had been what it had been through. Still looked exactly the same. So I sat on the side of the tracks, tried to catch my breath. The train, my new pretend brother, got farther and farther away, chugging to Chicago. Man, I'd found some family, and they were gone before we even got really to know each other. Well, there were 6 or 7 other people who didn't make the train, and we all walked back to Hooverville. They must have lit a big fire again. The sky in that direction was glowing orange. The cop that first threw down his billy club walked over to us and said, "He wasn't lying about the Flint police coming, but they're coming to bust up the shanty town. You all should get out of here." We got close to Hooverville and we heard 4 gunshots. We all spread to the woods and sneaked up to see what happened. I peeked from behind the tree. I could see a bunch of cops standing out with pistols. All the men and boys and women were left in Hooversville were bunched up on one side and the cops were on the other. The fire had lit and was burning bigger and bigger than ever. But now it was burning because the cops were tearing all the shacks down and they were throwing the wood and cardboard and hunks of cloth into the middle of it. One of the cops dragged the clothes washing pot over to the side and the stack his pistols down in it and shot 4 more times. Phew, instead of shooting people, they were shooting holes into the pots and the pans. A man was yelling, "You yellow lowlifes! You wanted you waited till we knew most of the men were gone. You cowards." The cops wouldn't talk or nothing. They just kept piling up Flint Hoovervilles into the fire. I tried to see if I could spot Days Malone, but there were too many people. It seemed like the only good thing that came out of going to Hooverville was that I finally kissed a girl. Maybe someone was trying to tell me something. What with me missing the train and the blue flyer floating back to me, maybe Daisy Malone was right. Maybe I should stay here in Flint. I walked back further in the woods, sat down, and pulled a blue flyer out of my pocket, opened my suitcase and back up, smoothed the flyer out, and took another good look at it. Maybe it came floating right back to me because this is Herman E. Calloway. Really was my father. Wait a minute. I sat up. The names Caldwell and Calloway are a lot alike. Both of them have 8 letters, and they aren't too many names that have C and A and an I and a W all together like that. I remember what I read in the little big book of gangbusters. It said a good criminal chooses an alias. That's a kind of close to their own name, except couldn't figure out who was the criminal here and why anybody needed an alias. I wanted to stay and look for Daisa and her mother, but it was too hard to hear all these people crying and arguing. Besides, I was still on the lam, so I started walking. If I hurried, I could get to breakfast at the mission.